I'm just hoping that people can hear me this morning. Um, Let me just try and get myself on screen. Can you give me a thumbs up if you can actually hear me? I was having problems with the headset again this morning. Um, so if you can somebody can just say, yep, you can hear me or not, that would be very useful indeed. Yep, audio okay. All right, excellent. For some reason I can't hear myself this morning. So, all right, well, on with the show then. Right, I'm Kevin Williams. This is my show, Elevenses. What do we have for you in today's show? Well, we have quite a lot of information as usual that I want to cover. Let me just get the ticker up for you, then you can see it all. Yeah, the first question is that BMF have they're investigating claims of prejudice against motorcyclists in the workplace. The AA helpfully told road users to avoid puddles, to avoid running through potholes. A learner has failed the theory test an astonishing 59 times, but that's not the record. Off-road bikes are to help the Thames Valley Police pursue nuisance bikers. Zero have brought home the Maudes Trophy for endurance. We'll cover that in a little bit of detail and explain exactly what it is. Fowlers, a mainstream dealer, are to stock CFMoto, and I think that could be a bit of a game changer for the brand. Dakar Rally, that gets a new Misson 1000 alternative race for vehicles that don't use internal combustion engines. We'll have a quick look at one that does. Italjet's new 559 twin scooter, and we'll have a look at the Honda 350. I don't quite know whether it's a CB or a GB. It's a bit confusing, but we'll have a quick look at that. And finally, we'll look at the saying that blame is a lazy way to make sense of chaos. So I'm going to start a new series on crashing today. So stay with me to the end of the show, and don't forget, if you have a question, a comment, anything you want to ask, do drop me a line. I'm always very interested to hear what you have to say. So right, okay, we've got 4 comments. Screen frozen. Oh, great. All okay now, says Kevin. Right, okay, good. All right, hopefully things will improve as the show goes on. I've got it on Ethernet and I'm still showing a poor connection to the server. So I'm guessing that's at the server end rather than at my end. Anyway, let's crack on. Hopefully everything will go as we want it to go. So what have we got for you today? The first thing to say is the online talk series. Do join me for that if you possibly can. It's going to be a talk about workload. Now, workload doesn't sound very exciting, does it? But basically, it's the mental ability that we have or don't have to process the information that comes to us from our environment. We focus very greatly on technical riding skills in motorcycle training, both at basic level and advanced. We kind of give some attention to increasing motorcyclist knowledge of riding, but it's kind of a bit woolly in many ways. But the area that's completely overlooked are the mental skills, and the mental skills are what pulls everything else together. So I will have a look at how we can use our brains better when we're riding the bike. So that is going out on the 18th of December, Monday the 18th, so just before Christmas. So it should be a good antidote, I hope, to Xmas shopping. The booking link is available to you. I hope I will see some of you online for that. And of course, you can still watch the Science Being Seen presentation that went out on the 20th of November. That's on catch up. So have a look for those. I'll try and put the links up. I'll try and remember to put the links up for you in the comments as we go. Right. Okay. So, excuse me. On with the news. Let's start with the weather forecast. Well, as you probably have noticed, it's been pretty chilly over the last few days. In fact, this morning it's a lovely, lovely sunny day. Still is here in London, but very cold. It's still apparently around 0 at the moment, although the frost has cleared. And it's been very cold in many parts of the country, and that has caused fog, which is lingering across southern parts, stretching up into the Midlands and across into Wales. And that could be here all day, and where that stays, it will be very, very cold indeed, and it probably won't shift until much later this evening. But there is some good news. There is some warmer air coming from the Atlantic, and as usual during this time of year, it's bringing some rain with it, but there are always problems. As it sweeps across the country later this evening through the night, watch out for that falling of snow if you are travelling late this evening, at least initially and at least on higher ground. Thursday looks like a wet and slightly milder day, with temperatures finally reaching double figures again in the southwest. And then Friday, Saturday and Sunday all look milder, but they look wet and very windy, and bands of rain will continue to sweep across the country from the Atlantic. So a real mixed bag of weather. So the lovely sunny crystal clear stuff gets replaced by rain. Petro's looked in as well. Good morning to Clive and Kevin are here. Nice to see you as usual. Right, okay. On with the news then. So the first question today is, are motorcyclists who use their bikes to commute to work or to visit different sites for work purposes, are they being discriminated against? Now, Alex Parson-Hulse of the rider rights group, the British Motorcycle Federation, he said he's looking into recent reports that several, at the moment, unnamed companies have banned employees from using motorcycles for trips that are in relation to their employment. As the BMF site explains, this could be for the purposes of going to see a supplier, meeting with a client, or attending a conference. And he says at the same time that other employees are apparently allowed to use their personal car for business purposes. And the BMF also reports that cases have been noted where employers are looking to actively discourage employees from commuting to work on their motorcycle. Alex says, if you've been affected by this in any way, I'd love to hear from you. I'm currently collecting data to try to establish the scale of the issue and the impact on motorcycling. I'm also interested to hear from you if you've experienced any difficulties in obtaining Class 1 business insurance for your motorcycle. This level of cover is needed for journeys during work hours to locations other than your normal place of work. Well, I certainly have had a lot of trouble getting motorcycle trainer insurance, and I know that other motorcycle trainers have. It's simply something that most insurance companies aren't interested in covering. So if the constant thefts of motorbikes from unsecured parking outside workplaces isn't enough, it's pretty grim actually if employers are also deterring people from using the time-saving and congestion-busting PTWs to make work trips and to commute. I think that's pretty appalling actually. Now, that's what the BMF are up to, but sometimes I have to admit I am astonished at the banality of advice from motoring organisations. I looked at the AA and their question about why there aren't more dual carriageways. Well, the obvious answer was they cost a lot of money and they cause a lot of disruption whilst they're being built. But the latest cracker from the AA is that they are advising drivers and riders to avoid puddles. Now, the theory is good. The puddle, of course, could conceal the pothole, and I'm sure most of us are actually aware of that. But the AA say our advice to drivers and those on two wheels is to avoid puddles where safe to do so. But if there is no alternative other than to travel through, then reduce your speed and keep an increased distance from the vehicle in front. Now, okay, increased distance from the vehicle in front is actually the more important point, because that helps you see the puddle, which could be a pothole in the first place, and then you can adjust what you're doing. So that's the first thing to do, and then only if you have to ride or drive through it, because there's no alternative, then do you reduce your speed. So get the advice right, guys. Now the AA say that they've had a record month for breakdowns caused by potholes. They say they've fielded 500,000 calls for the year so far. They have received 52,541 call-outs last month, for vehicles damaged by road defects alone, and they say that's 12% up on October last year and beats the all-time record from October 2017. Meanwhile, the AA have chipped in, the RAC have chipped in with their own advice. They say that the average garage bill after hitting a pothole for damage is around £440, and they're excluding replacement tyres incidentally for this. And they say that the damage frequently results in distorted wheels. Yes, well, I've got a couple of those on my motorcycle. Damaged shock absorbers, broken suspension springs. But to me, that sounds like it's more likely to cost rather in excess of £400 anyway. Hey ho. But the AA's Tony Rich, he blames this on continuous poor weather, and he cites the recent named storms, Babette, Kieran and Debbie. But is that actually right? I mean, after all, we've always had bad weather in winter. That's what winter is. So what's really contributed to the problem more than anything else is the lack of preemptive maintenance to fix minor problems before they become serious, and to reschedule, to resurface roads completely when they start to degrade. Now, saving cash by waiting for the roads to begin to fall apart really is a false economy, because the repairs that then follow the disintegration of the surface are temporary, and they have to be repeated over and over again. So frankly, had the roads been fixed at the first signs of damage as they used to be, they'd survive this constant freeze thaw of water in icy weather, which really does break up road surfaces, because the water wouldn't penetrate the surface to actually create that damage in the first place. So Rishi Sunak, Prime Minister, has pledged more than $8 billion in funding. That was one of his big takeaways from last month. But it's a band-aid on a decade and a half of neglect. The councils themselves say that their cost of repairing local roads stands at the moment at $14 billion. That's 6 million or 6 billion more than Sunak has promised. Right, okay, how many times can one learner driver fail the theory test? Well, the current record stands at 59 times for this year. The driver had to take all these retakes at a test centre in Redditch, and it's said to have cost him or her, they weren't named, £1,380. Another learner in Hull failed 57 times. One in Guildford passed at the 56th attempt, and the driver in Tunbridge Wells missed out on the pass score 53 times. Now, these figures all relate to learner drivers who passed the theory test in the first half of 2023, and the DVSA saying that the all-time record is actually held by a 28-year-old who failed his theory tests no less than 92 times in 2012. Now, Camilla Bennett, she's the managing director of the AA driving school, which has apparently launched a revision app to help learners prepare for the test, said, quote, "There's no doubt it's a tough test, and those learners' commitment to passing is amazing." Well, frankly, it's alarming that anyone can fail the test more than a couple of times. It's not that difficult. There are tricks and tips, and there's some basic knowledge that you need, but really it shouldn't be that difficult to anybody to pass. The Department for Transport's figures, though, actually show that the pass rates for theory tests has fallen from 65% to just 44% in the last 15 years. So is the test really tougher than it was? Or is it because learners are cutting corners on the practice? Is it because they're not getting as much experience on the road? Who knows? I'd be interested to know what's behind this higher failure rate. Okay, so what was I going to do? I was just going to put up the reminder that if you are enjoying the show, it's out Wednesdays and Sundays. It's normally live, occasionally recorded. Very rarely I miss a show. I might have to record one or miss one in a week or so's time. I'll update you on that. But you can always catch up with shows that you've missed on YouTube, on my Survival Skills UK channel over there. They're all in their own playlist. Facebook as well, they go out live on there too, but the YouTube channel's the place to find the old ones. Right, okay, so what's next? Well, Thames Valley, their police have created a new off-road motorcycle team, which is said to be helping tackle antisocial behaviour and rural crime. Now, this is all part of Operation Trail. Some new off-road bikes have been funded, and they've got those through a police sort of road safety initiative, which has been supported by the Police and Crime Commissioner. So, what are the bikes? These are they. They look very much like the little Hondas to me. CBFs. 250s, I think they are. And the scheme is said to allow officers to pursue offenders who travel into areas difficult to reach by car, including those riding quad bikes and motorbikes on parkland and estates. They'll also be used to help in searches for vulnerable people. I'll be interested to see what the results are a year or two from now, because I'm not convinced that this really deters motorcyclists. Now, okay, here's a blast from the past. It's the Maudes Trophy sitting there in the middle of the picture. Let me just zoom in on that to give you a slightly clearer view. There we go, you can see the big silver trophy there on the sort of just left of centre. You may be wondering what the Maudes Trophy is. I had to remind myself. I'm pretty sure I've heard of it, but I wasn't actually certain what it was all about. But it turns out to be an impartially observed endurance test for motorcycles, which was established in 1923 by George Pettit. He was the owner of Maudes Motor Mart of Great Portland Street in London. And this silver trophy for completing the challenge was provided by the ACU, or provided to the ACU, I should say, who acted as the body responsible for providing observers to see that the challenge was completed. Now, initially, the challenge was pretty popular. It was completed virtually every year between 1923 and 1939, but then the war got in the way. And post-war, only BSA, I presume that's the BSA team in the photo there, Honda, BMW, Suzuki, and Yamaha most recently have attempted the challenge. Now, I think the photo there shows the post-war BSA team, which featured Bert Perrigo. He was the chief engineer and works manager of the BSA motorcycle team. They took 3 BSAs, the bikes you can see there, on a round Europe tour. Now, the challenges that have been completed over the years have varied. For example, in 1933, a Triumph motorcycle with a sidecar attached to it covered 500 miles in 498 minutes at Brooklands. Honda took the trophy in 1962 by riding 3 standard production Honda 50 motorcycles. For your interest, it was a C100, a C102 and a C110. With a team of 20 riders around Goodwood for a week, day and night in a continuous test, and they covered almost 16,000 miles. In BMW attempted it in 1973. They ran 2 R75 5s continuously over the Isle of Man TT circuit for a week. And the most recent winners were Yamaha in 1994, who ran 10 FZR 600s, apparently all ridden by New Zealand riders, and they competed at the TT in the Supersport 600 TT. The bikes were picked at random from the UK warehouse. They were bog standard, and they averaged over 100 miles per hour. Unfortunately, that was the last time anybody entered the competition. So describing this 100-year-old trophy as prestigious might be over-egging a little bit, but I don't want to take anything away from Zero, who have just won it for themselves for the first time in 30 odd years. Now, 2 of their recently released Zero DSR/X's, they were ridden by a team of 6 riders, and they were led by Craig Carey-Clinch of the National Motorcyclist Council. They started from Land's End. The route took the riders to Lowestoft in East Anglia, up to Edinburgh in Scotland, and then across to Holyhead in Wales, and they ended some 1,300 miles and 60 hours later in Liverpool, just in time for the FIM Trophy Awards there. Now, Craig was joined in the team by journalist Martin Fitzgibbons, a former racer, Kurt Langen, Wheels Motorcycles, Andy Dalton, I believe he's the expert on insurance and legal questions. J&M Electro Bikes, Matthew Drew, and the Bike Sanctuaries, Macaulay Perkins and Ben Grayson. They are Zero dealers. Now, Dale Robinson, who's Zero's UK country manager, he said the idea of attempting to win the Maudes Trophy was to bust preconceptions surrounding electric motorcycles and the UK public charging infrastructure. Now, Zero's attempt took place last week. You probably remember what the weather was like. The team departed Land's End on Wednesday the 29th. The first overnight stop was in Lowestoft, and then they rode straight into snow, ice and sub-zero temperatures, which dipped as low as -6. The journey up the A1, I gather, was pretty unpleasant, and it was described as more of a test of man than machine. I suspect it doesn't even begin to cover the difficulties of the ride, most of which would have been in the dark, often in snow and ice. Now, after the event, Mr. Robinson said that potential customers are often asking questions about touring and riding in cold temperatures. So he said, our dealers now have first-hand experience riding in conditions no Zero owner is ever likely to find themselves in, and we've been able to prove our product in these most challenging conditions. I certainly did that. Craig Kerry Clinch, he said, I started the challenge with an open mind about the capability of electric motorcycles on long distance journeys, but the DSR-X's performed very well considering the extreme cold. But, he said, when it comes to infrastructure for riders, much more needs to be done by public authorities if they want to encourage a switch to EPTWs. It's not that charging facilities are rare, the opposite in fact, but the many have no facilities or shelter for riders waiting off their bikes. This is a matter the NMC will look into further, and it's actually something that I know has been commented on previously, that when some Zero was taken on a round Britain challenge, the rider was able to find charging points, but they were often the ones that are fitted to lampposts, and even where they are in service areas and things like that, they're outside. Infrastructure there, but not suitable for use by motorcycle riders, which is an interesting observation. Right, okay, moving on rapidly then. The 2024 Dakar Rally, that kicks off on January the 5th, and it won't just be for ICE engined vehicles. The Misson 1000 category is a new special event intending for vehicles that run on power sources like hydrogen and electric. It follows the main rally course, but basically runs on a separate 100-kilometre stretch. Now, the Italian brand Tacita, they've entered a pair of their Discanto electric bikes. I have to admit, I've never heard of them, and I've never heard of the other electric entries from Green Power Race and Arctic Leopard either. But they will go into the race alongside a MAN hydrogen truck, a Volkswagen hydrogen-powered Amarok, and a Japanese HYSEX, whatever that is. So there we go. Yeah, Kevin says Russian roulette with puddles hiding potholes. It is. I mean, it's a case of where do you look for a bit of road surface amongst the potholes on one of the roads I drive regularly. You know, I saw a driver got stopped for swerving all over the road. He claimed he was avoiding potholes the other day. It did turn out to be under the influence, but you know, some of my driving would probably attract attention as well as I dodge the potholes. What Kevin says about the theory test, many Generation X practice theory by repetition and mock exam apps rather than reading. Well, even if they do, if they practice enough to pass on the app, shouldn't they pass the test when they come to take it? It seems rather odd that they go and sit the test and pay money to practice. And Claire has looked in and said, better late than never. Good morning, Claire. All right, okay. So what have we got for you next? Well, this is a CFMoto 650NK. Now, if you want a sign that a brand is beginning to gain acceptance, it's the moment a long-established and respected dealer actually begins to sell them. That's pretty much what happened with the Japanese in the 1960s. So this is what's just happened to CFMoto. Fowlers of Bristol, they're a long established dealer. They've taken on the brand. Now, although CFMoto, which was actually branded as a WK back then, what their 650i, it did hit the heights of 4th place in the lightweight TT at the in 2016, I think it was, with Gary Johnson at the bars. He missed a podium by just 2 seconds, but I think that by getting a mainstream dealer on board, CFMoto really have made a very significant move here, because one of the things that many potential purchasers have talked about is the worry about servicing and warranty claims. I have to be honest, that's one thing that has made me think twice about buying a CFMoto. But having a top dealer stocking the range should help, I think, riders begin to accept that CFMoto really are here to stay. Fowlers not only, of course, have the servicing capability you'd expect of a main dealer, but they have comprehensive spares backup. They're said to be the largest supplier, largest stockist of genuine motorcycle parts in the UK. I certainly used to get some of my Yamaha parts direct from them. So CFMoto, they are busily developing their range with bikes that fit most needs, but at accessible prices. And I would say that this particular bike is a bit of a bargain. This is the 650NK. It's a liquid-cooled, fuel-injected parallel twin. As you can see, it's a naked bike. This is actually the special TT edition, but the base model of this machine is a fairly bargainous £4,499. I don't think that's bad for a bike with 65 or 70 horsepower, I think it is, if I remember correctly. So right now the range topper is the 800 MT Touring Dual Sport. That's the 799 twin-cylinder engine, which is based on KTM's design, and that bike comes with some pretty high-spec equipment. The KYB suspension, it gets cornering ABS, and it gets luggage, and you get one of those on the road for £9,199. Now, you will be paying rather more for this particular bike. Let me just get this one up on screen for you. There it goes. Now, after the flurry of motorcycle shows, there's little new to say about motorcycles, but here's a scooter with a bit of a difference. It's the Italjet Dragster. Now, the Dragster, they've always pushed the boundaries on what can be done with a step-through platform, and those of you with sort of reasonably long memories might well remember the raucous two-stroke twin Dragster. Now, emission regs, of course, long since did for that bike, but this is the new Dragster 559 twin, and it may rekindle some of those memories. The bike gets a trellis frame. It supports that sort of mid-engined or mid-positioned water-cooled 8-valve double overhead cam, 6-speed twin-cylinder motor. It puts out 58 horsepower, 43.5 kilowatts in standard trim. It can be restricted to 35 kilowatts for those on an A2 license, but in full power mode it's more power than Yamaha's T-Max and around 40 kilograms lighter, which is fairly astonishing. The gearbox is manual, gets a slipper clutch, you get front forks which are upside down, you get adjustable rear suspension, and interestingly it's got a ride height adjuster said to be adjusted, inspired rather by MotoGP. 15-inch wheels front and back, twin discs at the front, single disc at the rear. Now, when's it coming? Well, Italjet are apparently planning a late 2024 release. First of all, will come a limited edition with up-spec components, and speculation is that that will be priced somewhere between £11,000 and £13,000 to compete with the T-Max, and then a more basic production model will follow. There are also hints that the Dragster 559 may get its own competition series, whether that's a race series or more likely it may be that it will compete in the Italian Malossi Dragster Championship next year. Malossi are of course well known as developers of engine tuning parts for small bikes and scooters, and the options to up-spec the machine are said to include Öhlins suspension and Akrapovic exhausts. And last month the Italjet showed the product off at EICMA, and they confirmed that the machine is largely final. Okay, so what else have we got for you? Another bike here. Now, back in 2020, I showed you the weirdly named CB350 Highness, spelled H apostrophe Ness, launched by Honda India as a lightweight modern retro. Now, it was designed to hark back to an earlier era, and it looked very much like Honda wanted to take on Royal Enfield. Now, somewhat to my surprise, the bike hasn't appeared in Europe, but it did get launched as the GB350 in Japan. And now there's a freshly styled variant, this bike here. Let's have a bit of a look at it. Now, exactly what the designation of this particular machine is, I can't tell you, because I've seen various reports giving it different names. But whatever it is a 350. One review said it gets classic British looks, but frankly, to me, at least the front half of the bike, the styling cues take me straight back to my early 70s Honda CB250 K4. Now, it's got those sort of broad mud guards that wrap around the tyre, 18-inch rear and 19-inch front, of course, and you get those colour matched covers on the fork legs, and they're just sort of absolutely typical of the Honda CBs, the early CBs before they went naked with the G5. The differences, well, you get a twin seat there, a split seat, and a rack. Certainly didn't come with those on my CB. And you get single disc at the front, single disc at the rear. Drums, of course, on the old bike. Diamond frame, conventional twin shocks, so I think it pretty much looks much like the old bike. However, the single cylinder is perhaps a little bit of a letdown. It only puts out 21 horsepower, 15.5 kilowatts, but it is a very low rev, 5,500 RPM for peak power and peak torque, 29 Newton meters, so fairly torquey, 21.6 pound-feet. That comes in at just 3,000 RPM, so that's barely off tick over, and that's why the bike really only needs a 5-speed gearbox, which it indeed comes with. But it does get a modern slip assist clutch and selectable torque control, although I'm not quite sure why. Seat height's a little bit high, 31.5 inches, 800 millimeters, and the bike isn't particularly light either, 187 kilos, 412 pounds. Fuel tank just over 3 1/3 gallons, 15.2 litres, so a little bit porky. But you do get modern electrics. There's said to be a mixed digital analog instrument with, of course, smartphone connectivity, LED lights all round, and interestingly, you get an emergency stop signal built into the brake light, which flashes the brake light if you brake particularly hard. How reliable is the bike? Well, Honda India are offering a 3-year warranty as standard, and you can purchase an optional 7 years extension. So that's pretty keen to show off that they think it's going to last well. How much? Well, the Indian launch price was expected to be about $2,400 equivalent, and if you go for the Pro version, which gets the Honda smartphone voice control, not quite sure what that'll do, but you pay an extra $200 for that. It's headed to Japan. It will turn up there as the GB350C, but if it does come to the UK, I can't imagine it'll be under £4,500. Right, so quite an interesting bike there. I hope you like that particular machine. Clive says, I fancy the CFMoto 450 MT, which is due to release Q1 next year. Lack of dealers in Scotland concerns me a little and makes me reluctant to commit. Might end up being the new Royal Enfield Himalayan just because of dealer support. Yeah, I hope that other big dealers will start now to think seriously about taking on CFMoto, and that will take away some of the anxiety. I mean, Bristol's not exactly near to me, but it's better than buying a bike from a dealer that you've never heard of who might not be here this time next year. All right, okay, over to the in-depth part of today's show. Now I started with a quote there. Blame is just a lazy person's way of making sense of chaos. Now that was a Canadian author called Douglas Coupland. Now this applies, I think, particularly to the roads that we use, because for many years we've been offered this sort of comforting illusion that the roads are a carefully controlled environment. We're told they have strict rules, we're told they have smart road design, and we're also told that if we only had careful drivers and riders, the result would be safe. We're told that crashes result from people stepping outside the rules, and because the roads aren't properly policed, or because the drivers themselves are unskilled or risk takers. Only occasionally does poor engineering get a blame when the roads themselves are badly designed, but we tend to want to blame individuals, and we expect blame to be apportioned when somebody or something doesn't meet the standard. And the focus for this has always been three areas, the three E's as they are sometimes known. Engineering, where we build safer vehicles and design safer roads. Enforcement, where we deter bad driving with fines and points, and we remove the worst drivers from the roads altogether. And education, where we improve the skills and knowledge of those using the roads, which gives me an opportunity to remind you of my talk, which is going to be on the 18th, which is about the mental side of using the roads too. You can see what I mean when I said we tend to focus on skills and knowledge and forget how the mental game of riding keeps us safe. So, question is, are the roads safe enough? Well, engineering, I will fully admit, lies outside the scope of my own particular field of expertise, but it's fair to say that new generation of safety experts is challenging this existing thinking on safety in a way that bears some examination. Now, they argue that when looking at something as complex as a road network, it's simply not possible to design a system that is safe. The question that is always a good one to ask yourself is, if we had no roads and no motor vehicles, would anybody allow such a system to be designed from scratch now? I think the answer to that is fairly obviously no, it wouldn't. So what we have is a fairly chaotic system where the interactions that we call traffic are very complex indeed. There's no simple relationship very often between cause and effect that allows for an easy fix for problems on the road. There are a maze of interconnections, and basically as soon as we adapt the system to solve one problem, we very often generate another. Classic example here is you put a set of traffic lights in at one place to make one junction safer. The next thing that happens, of course, is that traffic starts to back up over other junctions which previously weren't an issue. So, the roads aren't safe. They'll never be safe. They're inherently risky, and it's actually the road user's behaviour that finds way to paper over these cracks. We give way to other drivers when perhaps we don't have to let them turn in and out of junctions. Yes, I know it's in the highway code, but it still relies on a driver to see what's happening and understand what they can do to help other people out. So it's not surprising when things do break down. We should just be thankful really it doesn't happen as much as it does, and it's road users who keep the roads moving. So what about the road users who don't obey the rules? We hear a lot about how it's enforcement and punishment that are the answer, because that, we're told, will reduce crashes because drivers will pay more attention to what they do. And fact is that road users generally, motorcyclists in particular, are often stereotyped as risk takers. But is it true? Does more enforcement solve the problem? Well, once again, more modern thinking on safety suggests that enforcement and punishment actually fail as a deterrent for a couple of reasons. Well, firstly, the minority of riders and drivers who are responsible for the most extreme risk-taking behaviour, such as major speed violations and performance of stunts, this behaviour is what gets all the press attention, of course. They simply aren't deterred. They go ahead anyway. And secondly, the majority of crashes involve ordinary road users doing ordinary things. The majority of incidents occur in the middle of everyday behavior. We're doing something that we've likely done many, many times before with complete success. But for some reason, on this particular occasion, something goes wrong. The system that we're using breaks down. you can't mitigate for that with enforcement and punishment, because in the moments immediately before something goes wrong and results perhaps in a crash, most of us aren't even aware that there is a problem looming. So how can you deter people from doing things which aren't extreme or unusual when they normally work? And this is as true for the driver who's about to pull across in front of a motorcyclist at a junction. As I've explained, many, many, many more drivers get this right than the very, very few who get it wrong every year. Or whether it's the rider who's about to enter a decreasing radius corner, isn't aware that they're going a bit too quick. They probably got round that corner or one very similar to it lots of times in the past. We're all doing everyday things that have had a successful outcome. Nothing in our experience prepares us to deal with that. So how can we deter people from that decision making? Doesn't make sense, really, does it? So what about the claim that road users aren't educated enough? Now, if we look specifically at the interventions aimed at powered two-wheelers riders in the UK, the driving test came in 1st of June 1935. Now, allowing for the interruption of World War II, it wasn't long before the first motorcycle training scheme was born in the early 50s, but the real changes happened just after I set out on two wheels in 1975. Don't shout that too loudly, it makes me feel very old. Now, when I started riding, it was the volunteer-run RAC ACU scheme. That was the only way to learn, but the two-part test came in the 1980s. That spawned the first commercial training schools. In 1989, we got the much better pursuit test, which replaced the old round-the-block 10-minute test, and passing the test at that point got really much harder. Compulsory basic training, that came in 1990. The direct access scheme for training on the bigger bikes for older riders came in 1997, as the younger riders got restricted to smaller bikes. Off-road manoeuvres, they made up the module 1. That was the part of the current two-part test. They came in 2011, so over a decade ago now, and that was matched to changes in the licensing regime, which gave us the current 3 stepped licenses if you discount mopeds. So, and that's not counting, of course, the numerous interventions which have also been aimed at riders who already hold a full motorcycle license, such as BikeSafe. So, what happened? Well, it's true, since the end of the Second World War, there's been a huge reduction in numbers of fatalities and serious injuries for riders, with a genuine fall in crash rates when you measure the number of crashes per distance travelled. But that improvement does seem to have tailed off since 2011 or so. But it is true that some of those reductions were simply due to fewer riders on the roads. Now, more recently, motorcycle traffic has risen again, but the steady reduction in casualties continued through the 2000s. But it's unclear just how much of that has been resulted from the improved technology on the machines themselves, better brakes, better tyres and ABS, of course, not to mention improved chassis and suspension design, but also from far better and more consistent use of protective in clothing, particularly here I'm thinking in terms of helmet design. Much improved over the years since the first plastic helmets, which sometimes shattered on impact, and particularly helmet retention, the strapping, if as long as it's used, has improved remarkably. And of course, injuries have been reduced by the use of body armor inside clothing. It's not necessarily protecting you from breaking bones, but it certainly protects from abrasion. But the fact is that increasingly there's research which suggests that the provision of practical rider training actually doesn't have a great deal of long-term effect on the motorcycle crash rate. And the inescapable fact is that when you look at the motorcycle crashes that there are, we're still caught out by situations where you think that training would help us predict and deal with those issues. So we're still having the same crashes our great-great-grandparents had back in the 1920s and 1930s. So I can fairly confidently state training may have changed the way that riders learn to ride, but it hasn't changed the way we crash. And that really should lead us to a very uncomfortable question. Why is it that with over 60 years of history of testing and training, and of course all the better riding books that we have on the market now, just why are UK riders still crashing in the same places in the same way? That's a question that hardly ever gets asked, and I think it's time it is one we thought about. Right, so that's today. If you've got any comments, any questions, anything you want to say about the in-depth piece I've just finished, do drop me a line. I'm more than happy to answer you, of course. Anything else I wanted to say? No, I can't think of anything. Don't forget the live talk, which is in just under 2 weeks. Hopefully see you there. That'll talk about our brains, and that may give you an insight into what I've just been talking about why we are still crashing in the same ways that riders did donkeys years ago. So that is it for today. If you are out there on the bike, it's a lovely sunny day at the moment. It is cold. Watch out for icy patches in shaded places, and watch out for fog if you head to the areas where it is as well. And remember, it is going to get a bit ropey for the rest of the week. So if you are out there on the bikes, do stay shiny side up. And I hope to see you for the next show on Sunday. I'm Kevin Williams. This has been Elevenses, and thank you for looking in.